where you're cut. That's highly unusual.
Sorry, Paul, a little late getting started
I
here.
was going to call Mark, but then I thought, well, they probably know. Their intelligence probably told them why. Yeah, they walked by me, and I went, oh, okay, because I recognize their cuts. They stopped me.
That's what we left some money behind.
Yeah, tax dollars.
We need some sales tax money.
Yeah.
Do I kick us off, Paul?
Yeah, we'll go ahead and call the special meeting of the Yreka Finance Committee for June 13th, 2023 to order. Call to order, pledge allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The Finance Committee is a standing subcommittee consisting of 2 council members, currently Paul McCoy and Colleen Baker, the city manager, the city treasurer, and the finance director. The Finance Committee considers and makes recommendations on matters referred to it by the city council relating to finance, budget, audits, capital planning, and debt. Public comment, public participation is limited to those items listed on the agenda. If your comments do not concern an item listed on the agenda, please address the city council in the next regular meeting. The city requests that persons addressing the Finance Committee refrain from making personal slanders, profane, or disruptive remarks. Committee members, when recognized by the committee chair, may ask questions from the presenter, but no action may be taken by the committee during the public comment section of the meeting. Under the Brown Act, the committee is prohibited from discussing or taking action on any item not listed on the posted agenda. Please speak from the podium. Please state your name for the record prior to providing your statements. Please address the council as a whole. Please address, if you have documents to present, please provide a minimum of 6 copies, and please limit your remarks to 3 minutes. Do we have any public comment? Anybody on the line?
We do not.
No? Okay.
We do not.
Public comment follow-up. This is the time for the Finance Committee or the city manager to respond to public comments. I may direct staff to prepare a report or place an item on a future agenda. Since there's no public comment, there'll be no follow-up. So discussion, we will 4A is presentation discussion of utility rate study with Pace Engineering, and then we'll go from there. So we'll turn it over to
Paul.
We're gonna let Paul take off with this.
Go ahead, Paul.
Reader.
from Pace Engineering.
Correct.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Nice to meet you, Paul and Colleen. You've seen the memo in the packet, and that's kind of a design presentation for you guys. And the next step for us will be to create a more comprehensive, formalized document with more data and tables to present to council. But this kind of is intended to provide you all with kind of a status of where we are and how we ended up here. Just a little bit on the background of the rate studies. The city performed the first rate studies in 2008. And prior to then, the city was really not on any kind of schedule for updating rates. So the 2008 rates ended up being very painful because both the water and wastewater enterprises were kind of operating in the red, and rates had to be essentially doubled in 2008. That was a 5-year plan as well. So coming close into 2012, 2013, the city did another update. And at that time, city council elected to not implement those rates. So it went another 5 years without any changes to the rates. And then in 2018, another 5-year series was enacted. And kind of that 5-year layoff between 2013 and 18 ended up being fairly challenging. And so the city's kind of been playing a little catch up since then. So here we are in 2023. Your current rates will remain in effect until the end of this calendar year, so December 31st, 23. Then on January 1st, either if the council decides to implement rate adjustments, new rates would go into effect at that time. So we've met several times with city staff in the last several months to kind of go through the rate making process. And how that works is we start with the city's adopted budget. So in this case, last fiscal year and this current fiscal year budget, and we project expenditures going forward. And that can be challenging. We try to look at inflationary trends and try to make our best guess on, what inflation on expenditures is going to be in the future. In the 2018 study, we assumed about a 4% across the board increase on expenditures, and the inflation ended up being, about double that or more for both the water and wastewater funds. I think we've all kind of seen the impacts of inflation in our personal lives. So fortunately, the impacts to the city's enterprise funds weren't as bad because the city was able to delay some planned capital improvements. And it was also successful in getting some pretty substantial grants to pay for capital projects that we had previously assumed might be funded with city funds. So that's allowed both kind of enterprise funds to remain fairly healthy through this period of increased inflation. So I don't know, can I share a screen? You guys be able to see that? Let me see if I can. I can't do that. I wonder, Emily, can someone there bring up the agenda so I can kind of reference some tables in my memo?
Yeah, Retta's working on that right now, Paul.
Oh, there we go. Perfect. That's what I'm looking for. So the approach, like I said, is to develop a revenue projection, a revenue needs plan going forward, and then you back into that to establish rates to meet those revenue goals. And so what the two most important aspects of that are, what is our projected inflation on expenditures over the next 5 years? That's one consideration. And then the next one is, what's the volume of capital projects that the city wants to self-fund? So there's different approaches for funding capital improvements. One is through self-funding, another is through outside grants, and then another is outside loans. Obviously, we try to avoid the outside loans because it imposes, multi-year debt on the city. So it's usually a combination of self-funding, and the city is aggressively pursuing grants. Now, sometimes, loan financing is inevitable. You have large capital projects, the needs are there. We can't get the grants. The city doesn't have enough cash to fund it themselves. And so you take out long-term debt, but that's usually a last resort. So this table 1 that you see in front of you presents 3 scenarios. We go back to table 1. There we go. Perfect. So on the left column of the table shows the current water rate for a 5/8 meter base, which is your most common service in the city. And the current rate is 38.45 base rate, not including consumption. So at the end of this fiscal year, which is the end of this month, the city's projected to have about 2.3 million in unrestricted cash. And so an important strategy going forward is we want to at least maintain the level of cash at the end of 5 years that we start with. And so based on that premise, you kind of work across the table there in the first row. In this current fiscal year, the city's approved about $1.8 million in self-funded capital improvements. And so that's the third column there, that 1.8 million. And so in order to keep 2.3 million in unrestricted cash at the end of 5 years, which would be June 30th, 2028, we would need an 8.4% rate increase per year to maintain that cash balance. And so that would make that water rate 57.55 at the end of 5 years. So it would have to increase from 38.45 to 57.55 at the end of 5 years. And there would be an 8.4% per year rate increase. Before I move on, are there any questions regarding that? Is that clear?
Sounds great, Paul.
Okay. So we've identified through working with city staff that there's about $4 million of potential capital improvements out there that could be self-funded. In other words, using accumulated cash in the city. And so those next two rows in the table present a couple scenarios on and determine what the resulting rate increase would need to be to fund additional capital improvements over and above the 1.8 million that's already been approved. So the second row down there, if the city were to self-fund 2.65 million of those improvements, you would need nearly a 10% per year increase to maintain that 2.3 million cash reserve. And the rate at the end of 5 years would be 61.64. And then the bottom row, of course, is if you tried to fund the entire $4 million that's kind of been identified, you would need a 12.8% per year increase, and the rate would go to $70.22 at the end of 5 years. So those are scenarios. The 8.4% is probably fairly representative of what actual inflation has been in the last few years. But as you start getting into those, 10, 12+%, those are substantial rate increases, and you can see the impacts on the rates at the end of 5 years. So a question might be, well, if we don't approve the high rates to fund the entire 4 million, what happens? What are the city's options for funding those improvements? And there are options. The city's continuing to pursue grant opportunities. The grant climate is fairly favorable right now for water and wastewater capital improvements. So the city will continue to seek those grants. Some of those improvements might be needed to facilitate upcoming development. And I want to be clear that we're not asking existing ratepayers to fund development, but there are some improvements out there that are needed to fund development, but we can't allocate 100% of the cost on development because the rate base, a portion of the existing rate base may be benefiting from that. And a good example might be there's an existing 6-inch old steel water line, and it's worn out, it leaks, it needs to be replaced. But in order to facilitate future development, maybe we need an 8 or a 10-inch line. So we can't impose the entire cost on development because the line needs to be replaced anyway, and the existing rate base benefits from that. So when we did your development impact fee study a couple years ago, we went through all those percentage apportionments between what future growth should fund and what the existing rate base should fund. So in that case, if you had a development come in, say they wanted to do a 20-lot subdivision, and the city came back and said, well, this old 6-inch line needs to be an 8. The developer might say, well, how's the city going to fund its portion of that? And if we don't have the cash, then the developer may have to fund it themselves and then enter into some type of reimbursement agreement with the city over some period of time. That's a pretty common practice. But there are ways around it, is my point. And so I don't think the city needs to feel obligated to try to fund that entire 4 million of improvements when the future development climate is somewhat unknown and unpredictable. So are there any questions pertaining to that? I think before we kind of get to the end of the presentation, I think city staff is going to want to kind of hear from the finance committee and where we should land on this for the purpose of making a presentation to city council. And I think we can get through the wastewater portion before we have that discussion, but open to questions or comments from anyone.
I don't have any.
Okay,
Hey, Paul, I've got one just real quick, just for clarification a little bit. I think it's important to realize that 3.3 million in unrestricted cash in 2023 doesn't have the same weight in 2028.
Mhm.
So, I mean, we're keeping it here at 2.3, but as we've found in the last 2 years with construction costs rising, that 2.3 doesn't go that far. And so you look out to 28, 2.3s.
Thank you, Matt.
That's an unknown. You know,
Yeah.
It could mellow out a little bit on that side. But
Yeah, historically, your money in 10 years is going to be worth substantially less than it is today. Absolutely. That trend is never ending, I believe. So that is a good point by Matt.
that's all.
Did you hear that, Paul?
I did. Yes, thank you.
One,
There are no questions right now from Councilman Baker or myself. So,
Okay. All right, before we move on to sewer, I'd just like to point out to you that the city has been very aggressive in the last, 5+ years in seeking grant opportunities and just in the water enterprise itself. In the last couple of years, it's sought and been successful in getting about $10 million worth of 100% grant funding to make substantial improvements to its water infrastructure. We've been working with the city and other grant applications for big projects as well, and the city will continue to do that. So if successful, it could improve the city's financial position too in the water enterprise.
Paul, this is Retta.
Yeah,
I think I do want to point out for the council that there are other reserves that are dedicated to like the Fall Creek pipeline replacement. So just so you know, this is only those reserves, and he'll probably go into that later, that are unrestricted, if that makes sense. There's probably about 8 million in reserves altogether.
exactly. Good point, Retta. And the Fall Creek pipeline replacement reserve is fairly substantial for obvious reasons. The city also has restricted reserves for debt obligations. So this is really just the unrestricted cash that would be available for capital projects and to help the city through the ebb and flow of revenue. Obviously, the water fund can be challenged because most of your revenue is obtained during the summer months when water use is high, but the winter months, the revenue wanes a little bit. So these reserves help dampen that impact.
Oh, this is Jason. I just wanted to point out to our council members here that ultimately both water and wastewater have 3 different options. And so ultimately we will kind of want to gauge what you guys are thinking based off of the options that are in front of you today.
Yep.
So,
and this is Paul McCoy, Paul, and we do understand that the reserves are there for emergencies that we hope we don't have, but we don't want to spend them. We want to reserve them in case there is an emergency that costs us millions of dollars.
Yep, good point. Okay, are you driving the ship, Retta? Can we go to the next page?
There you go.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, and so the wastewater fund, similar approach in terms of the rate making approach. We look at your adopted budgets and then forecast expenditures going forward based on assumed inflation factors. And it's still the same 2 considerations for establishing rates. What is going to be that future inflation on expenses, and what will the city be able to self-fund for capital projects? And so table 2, as you can see, is structured very similarly to the water fund. In the far left column, 5110 is your current single family residential rate, sewer rate. The wastewater fund has about 4.1 million in unrestricted cash. That's projected by the end of this month. And you can kind of see from the bottom row of the table, there's about 6.7 million in potential self-funded capital improvements for the wastewater fund. And so in the first column, or the first row rather there, if the city were to fund 2.5 million of the 6.7 with its own funds, it would need a 7.25% rate increase each year to maintain that cash balance at the end of 5 years. And so the rate would go from 51.10 to 72.50 at the end of 5 years. And so working down the table, similar approach. If the city wanted to increase that self-funded amount from 2.5 million to 4 million, your rates would need to increase just over 10% per year. And your rate at the end of 5 years would be 82.66. And then if you wanted to fund the whole thing, the whole 6.7 with your own funds, you're looking at a 14.5% per year increase, and rates would go from 51.10 to over $100. So that's the needed rate increase for wastewater is probably a little lower, and but not insignificant. And just like the water, the city has done really well with grant funding. Within the next couple weeks, the city will be starting construction of their collection system improvement project, which it got about a $5 million grant from state revolving fund to do. So it's working towards that. The city also has a grant application in for Yreka Creek Sewer Project. The success in that remains to be seen, but the city's had good success. And then the city's also working on a substantial grant application to make substantial improvements to its wastewater treatment plant. So the city's pursuing all the grants it can at this point. Okay, let's go to the next page. Okay, so both the water write-up reference table 9, and this table will be included in the final rate study report that gets presented to City Council. And this is just the projection of expenditures within the water enterprise. And so as you can see, the water enterprise is broken into different departments: finance, public works administration, water distribution, water supply and treatment. And you see the grayed out columns are actual expenditures for 21-22, and then budgeted expenditures for 22-23. And we use that data to project the expenses going forward over the next 5 years. You see the inflation factor column there near the middle of the table. In general, most of the operating expenses, we assume 3%, except for wages and benefits, which based on past history has usually trended higher. And so we've got about 4% for wages and 5% for benefits there. And so this table really represents the revenue needs and results in the table 1 and table 2 that we just went over. So we can go down, Retta, to the next part of that table. Then there's a water conservation department, and then the Greenhorn Reservoir Fund is a new fund set up. That's another project that the city is seeking grant funding for, which is to take advantage of its water right to Greenhorn Reservoir and create a backup water supply. So we're assisting the city with that application currently and applying to state revolving fund for grant funding on that. The bottom of the table, the capital projects, water distribution, these are all different projects that are identified to be funded with the unrestricted cash. And there's a lot of different colors there, but essentially the East Lenox pipeline replacement that's highlighted in orange there, that's already an allocated expenditure for that project, and the city got 5 or 6 million bucks on that project, all grant money. And there's also a small STIP project on Oregon Street that the city's able to get grant funding through the STIP program. That's at the bottom of the table in yellow there. So let's go to the next table. More colors. And so again, the orange highlights are projects that were identified in the city's master plan and development impact fee. You see some zeros in there. because unless the city wants to incur substantial rate increases to fund those with its own funds, we've showed those at zero for now, assuming that we won't go there. In the budgeted 22-23 column, you see the yellow highlighted. Those are actual grant allocations that the city has received for those projects. And then you see the yellow highlighted cell under 25-26 for the call it the South Yreka water supply distribution improvements. There's other improvements besides the Greenhorn water treatment facility, but that could be a substantial project. The city's seeking 100% grant dollars for that. And it's a mouthful, over 32 million. So we'll see what happens with that one. So this, I didn't show in this memo the financial plan, which kind of summarizes these expenses in a table, shows the revenue based on rates, and then what the reserve amounts are over the net 5-year period. But that financial plan table will get presented to council. This was just intended to show the finance committee the basis of the scenarios that we presented in the 2 tables in the memo. So we can move on to the next one. Should be wastewater. There we go. Similar concept. Table looks similar. The wastewater fund is divided into several departments, just like the water fund: finance, public works, admin, wastewater collection, wastewater disposal. You see the inflation factors. We assume similar inflation factors on wastewater as we did for water. And we show actual and budgeted expenditures, and then the 5-year projection are the columns to the right. Next slide. Similar color scheme here for the capital projects. The yellow highlighted cells are in 22-23 are actual grant allocations. So the 5.075 million is actual been obtained. And then those that are in subsequent years, the Yreka Creek sewer improvements and the big improvements for the wastewater treatment plant are grant applications that the city is currently seeking. So the orange improvements there in the middle of the table or the identified improvements in the master plan, and also the development impact fee plan. And those improvements represent the city's portion of improvements needed to accommodate growth. So even though the total there is, I think there's 6.7 million total, we're only showing 2.5. That's in the first scenario we showed in table 2. But the actual cost for those improvements is much higher because the development community is going to fund the biggest majority of these improvements through development impact fees. And I think that's the last one, Retta, I think, in my memo.
Yes, I think that's it.
Okay. So that kind of gives you really kind of a snapshot of where the rate committee landed on potential rate scenarios going forward. And so I think we're just kind of looking for feedback and direction from the finance committee as to what we should bring to city council at a future meeting.
This is Jason. I just also wanted to point out that, and I know you did, Paul, but just reiterate 25-26 is essentially a hypothetical request for 100% funding of $64 million worth of projects that the cost would not be on any of our ratepayers.
Thank you, Paul, very much. And thank you, Jason. We'll throw it back to the finance committee for right now for a little bit of discussion. I know that the history of not this council, but this Yreka City Council has been to, for lack of a better word, defer fees in order to help our citizens. And in essence, in theory, it's a wonderful idea. We want to help everybody, but in reality, it helps nobody, because what it does is it really put the city at risk. The last time that we, again, I'm not, it's not none of us really sitting here, but the council as a whole decided that they would defer this and they weren't going to act on it. And I think it behooves us, A, to act on it, and B, I think just due to the fact that we have inflation that we know is going to be for the next 2 years and probably a little bit longer than that. Realistically, no matter what the election outcome is, we're going to have some inflation for 18 months to 2 years or 3 years later. It behooves us to really look at our budget, look at our reserves, and which are just that. We want them, because if we ever had an issue with Fall Creek, we'd surely want to take care of that. And we don't want to go, oh, well, we saved everybody money there, but for the last 10 years by not raising rates, or we raised them as little as we could, but then we, oh gosh, now we got to go in and pull out 16 or 18 or 20 million to do something at Fall Creek. And then we're really putting the city, the water source or the sewer at risk. So, with that, I just want us to bear that in mind as we look at this. For me, I think that a rate increase in my mind, I can always speak for me, is a no-brainer, and I would definitely recommend for that. And honestly, I'd rather see us, I'm looking at it, and I'd rather see us go on the high end rather than the low end, so that we can, because we are going to grow some. I mean, if we get, which I'm sure we will, these 100 jobs at Pfeiffer, and we get 84 more from the hotel, and let's just assume that only 50% of those, I think this is highly unrealistic, but 50% of those jobs come from somebody out of town. That's still 184. That's 92 jobs from out of town. So, and let's assume that only 70% of those people live in the city. That's roughly, again, another 70, not households, but 70 people. So, I mean, it is going to continue to stretch our water and sewer. And we're going to need to continue to plan for that. So, and I'm going to rest what I have to say, defer to Councilwoman Baker and the rest of the committee.
So thank you so much, Councilmember McCoy. I just hate playing catch up, because it makes us, as a whole, makes us look like we're just trying to, stick it, for lack of better terminology, to the public. And that's not the case at all when you look at the history and realize that the city council could have done a better job, and we would not be where we are today. So I've always, even though it hurts, because I pay the water bill too, just like everybody else. I'm just for definitely increasing it. And I'm of the mind of going the middle ground, the middle increase. And then if we get a lot of, pushback, maybe we could lower that a little bit. But yeah, I'm thinking that we just need to move forward with the middle of the road increase.
Well, I'll speak on behalf of staff, and we agree, and thank you for that feedback. And ultimately, I think that this is a good argument to be made to make sure to make this adjustment this 5-year cycle, because if for some reason the council did not do that, we would be at a huge disadvantage in 5 years. And I think if we've heard at Lola meetings, the city of Montague had an issue with not raising rates, and then the state revolving fund coming back to them and telling them absolutely no, we're not going to fund any of your projects because you're not charging correctly. But I also wanted to point out that, and I think Retta and Emily would do better at discussing this. We have a multitude of options for anybody that falls behind. And there is the ability to get on a payment plan. During COVID, a lot of past bills were paid ultimately through the state revolving fund on water and wastewater. And I think that there's grants available. Maybe you can speak to that.
There's still programs right now. The state has a ton of money to help people stay on top of their bills. They just have to go through Great Northern, establish with them, and the state will pay their water and sewer bills right now. So there is options out there. We do work with them all the time on payment plans and trying to keep them up to date and current as best we can. And we have low income option.
Yeah, but I would say with our current person doing the billing, we're in really positive state at the moment with the public and people being on track, making payment.
I think last time, I think we only had like 20 shutoffs, which is pretty low for us. And 10 of them came in right away and we're like, here's it in full. We just have people that, I don't know why, they just enjoy writing it out to the end and then they come and pay it in full. I don't know. It makes no sense, but they do. Like people, we have people that just don't pay their bill until they have a late notice.
It's just that way.
That's just how they operate.
That's just
It's a mental
it's just a
thing.
way of thinking, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
It just happens. It doesn't change until
Correct.
they don't change.
Correct. I just want to point out that there are still needs that we have assessed that we can delay appropriately that aren't included in here. If we put our ultimate wish list in this, it would be a much higher rate. So I think thinking middle of the road is a better plan to help soften those future increases as well.
Yeah.
Retta, anything to add?
I think they've done a great job on getting this together and timely and, it doesn't surprise me at all. Actually was the engineering news record was 8.4% in January, Emily.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, so, and that's what Public Works is experiencing is just commodity costs are high. So this should keep us on track to hold those necessary reserves. And the other thing, as Jason pointed out, is they do look at your rate and it's called the MHI, median household income, that you have to keep that benchmark for state funding that you as a system are collecting at least that MHI level of the percentage of the bill for your fees to enable to get the state grant awards. They expect that of a well-run system.
This is Councilman McCoy, and I'm going to come back and I'm going to agree with the city manager, the finance director, and Councilwoman Baker. And I'm going to tell you, after sitting on both sides and being one who would complain about the raise, all of a sudden we get this quote unquote huge raise from council. My only concern for me, and I guess this is going to be up to council to decide, is the rate increase, because I am thinking that if it were 20 years ago, I would say we're going with the lowest. After sitting on this council for 5 years, almost 5 years now, and looking at what's in front of us as far as water, as far as sewer, as far as roads, cops, firemen, and making sure that we have a really top-notch little city, I actually would elect to go with the higher over 5 years. Because again, we are phasing it over 5 years, and that's not to say that I couldn't agree with the middle year, but I mean, I think my recommendation at this, after my 5 years on this council, would be to go with the higher so that we know that we are covered. And it also may help us so that in the end, we don't have to raise as quickly, maybe 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 years down the road. But that's just with me, and I just wanted to get that in. But I am in agreement with all of you that we do need to do some sort of a raise. We need to bring this to the, I mean, do we need to bring this to the full city council? And do we need to ask for a raise and then see where the 5 members lie? That's what I'm addressing that to Councilwoman Baker, but obviously it's what you want to do, and that's what I'm thinking. What are you thinking, Councilwoman Baker? Needs to be brought to him, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. Isn't
Okay.
that part of the process?
Yes.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
actually, you guys raise a good point, and maybe between Emily and Retta, we can just real briefly just explain that process, because there is a very specified process to the 218.
This is my first 218, just, so I'm hoping Retta will pipe in and tell me when I've gone off the rails. So once we take this rate study to council, council approves the rate study. At which time we go into the process of called 218, where we will send out ballots to every property owner, and they have the opportunity to protest vote. If they do not respond, we take it as a thumbs up. If they respond appropriately, we take that into account and we count how many there are. If we get 50+1 of protest, it fails. And
So,
kind of the-
yeah, I'm sorry to cut
No,
you
go
off.
ahead.
Yeah, ultimately, it is still, the city council is making a decision, but ultimately democracy will, resolve, right? The public will have their say in this item.
How many property owners do we have? I mean, I guess I'm considering that my wife and I are one property owner, correct?
Correct. It's
So-
per parcel.
So what do you,
I feel like there's 3,200,
Okay, great.
3,400 like structured. We generally, when we were talking about broadband, I felt like it was somewhere in that range.
thank you.
I think this is right. You touched the point there on the property owner. Emily, you want to call out maybe the change in the billing also?
Yes, we would like to rectify our renter issues we have. As you can imagine, we have a number of renters that we put the property into their name. It's a long process trying to follow up with them when they move out. It's challenging. So we are proposing changing it to say, if you own 3 or more properties, it is now your business. And that business needs to stay in your name. So you either collect that directly from the renter but as far as our discussions with the property owner, it's just with that. They would have to pay for that bill. Does that make sense?
It does. And I remember you also said something about upgrading the water meters. Is
So
that part of,
The cellular read? Yes, that's a phased in approach over the 5 years in the study. And I don't know the exact numbers that Emily phased it in, but they won't all change overnight, but they'll start phasing in. It's just the meter read head to cellular.
So it would take our major property owners, the Michelle Hills, who own a number of properties, just as an example, they would all stay within her company's name. Their company would pay that bill.
Yeah, because we act as kind of a property management company otherwise, because inevitably people are cycling through these rentals. And if somebody owns 50 rentals, we're constantly engaging the new utility bill that needs to get set up. And so it's a way to kind of minimize the amount of effort that has been put forth by the fiscal tax, I think, where somebody could be in there for 2 months, all of a sudden they've been kicked out, and then the next person's coming in. And what we end up having, what Emily has dealt with in your 20 months here, is all these deals that different property owners had with the prior staff, or maybe they didn't have, but they're claiming they had some special deal where it gets very complicated. We need proof that the person has a rental agreement. And sometimes we get pushback from the person that owns the property as though, oh, just take my word for it. But then if we do that, all of a sudden we have no documentation. And then all of a sudden the property owner's upset with us. So we get put in a very difficult position, and this will mitigate us being put in that position.
We've literally had to take a lease and compare it to previous leases if it's the same signature, because this is a fraudulent lease. So, right, so my fiscal techs are playing investigator, and which is not their job duties to have to do that. So this would help eliminate a huge workload on my staff to streamline what they need to do.
Well, that's not our function anyway. It's not, our function is just to go ahead and collect that and provide the service, provide the water or whatever it is. So what's needed to go, is that, you don't need council approval to do that. That's just an internal structure restructuring.
We're just letting you know that.
Thank
that's
you.
What's coming in.
It is part of the 218 voter
Thank you.
process. It does have to be called out in that process of who votes, because if a tenant's responsible for the bill, then they have a vote. If the property owner is responsible for the bill, they have a vote. So when you set out your 218 voting procedures or protest procedures, you do need to call that out. Sorry.
Well, I just say most places that I have lived, whether it was college or after college in California, I paid my rent and my utilities other than electricity were included in that rent. So my landlord was paying for that. I had to go down to not city hall, to the SDG&E or whatever it was and get the utility put in my name. That was my responsibility and my responsibility to pay, but water and sewer and all that was not, because it was included in the rent. You know, they just charged me a little bit more for it, so.
Yeah, and my experience as a renter over the last 6 years is every place that I've lived, I've paid the water bill, the utility bills, all of those are not included in the rent. So what I'm hearing you say though, is that if there is somebody like me who's a renter, but I pay my water bill myself, then I'm going to have the opportunity to vote on this
If
or the protest.
it depends. So if the property owner has 3 or more rentals in town, what Emily's proposing, or staff is proposing, is that at that point, if they're engaging in a business and the business should carry the bill. If you have just 1 or 2 rentals, if in your case, if your landlord only owns 1 or 2, it would stay in because it's not really their business per se. So it's kind of just finding that 3 or more, or more than 3, I forget where that cutoff is, then the responsibility of paying the bill goes to the property owner. And how they would receive the bill. So we have some that have hundreds or more rentals that she's doing collections on.
So I think what Mrs. Baker was asking though too, was that who gets to vote on that? Is it just the property owners with, say, 3 or more rentals that
Or
gets to
in-
vote on that? Or how does that, or is that not a vote?
Yeah, because in this instance, it is the renters, right?
Sorry,
It's
Mrs.
the
Baker.
person with the account. And I would assume that, let's just say Miss Baker, the property owner owned 4 rentals. I would assume that Miss Baker would be getting to vote now, and hypothetically, if it passed, then she would not get to vote 5 years from now. Is that accurate?
I'll have to check with Andrew Jared. It seems to me that who pays the bill going forward gets the vote count, but I'll have to check on that.
Okay.
Okay, so it would be the opposite then.
Yeah.
So when are your new processes being implemented?
If everything passes, it would be January 1.
Okay,
So it kind of takes, so that if you might indulge me just a little bit. So once the rate study, Paul will probably prepare a draft of that. And then we start working, then we would bring that draft back to the council and they would adopt the rate study, which then simultaneously, concurrently, will be running with our, the law offices, with Andrew Jared and the law offices of CHW, the 218 procedure. And then we start doing the town halls, making that information known, informing the ratepayers of the upcoming rate increases. as well as making known to those with rental properties of the changes as well, because they will probably not like that. And so it'll take a little bit of time kind of through the summer and fall to get that. And then once adopted, if through the protest, 50% plus less than 50% protest votes are received, and you have to go over what constitutes a vote, and you go through that, then the rates are adopted after that. So right now, we're just kind of getting the study prepared of what we need to run the system. And then kind of the next phase of that will be incorporating into the rate study. If we weren't doing so much the change in the who pays the bill, it would probably run a little faster because we're changing that. So there'll be mailers involved, things like that, and some outreach.
Well, I mean, however it comes out on our end, on the municipal end, we're taking local control. On the public end, we're giving local control. We're letting them vote. And you're saying town halls, so we would have some
You do want to have some
in-person
information
town
sharing.
hall. I mean, now people can zoom in, but we'd have some in-person town halls, correct?
Probably you'll want at least a couple of public
Okay,
outreach.
okay.
And we could do either advertise it, at the meeting and have Paul come down to that meeting with the council. And then when we were doubling rates, we had several, are you in on that now? Town halls and things like that, because that was kind of, this isn't quite that, but it's enough to kind of get that information out. Otherwise, a lot of people become aware of it on their first bill, and then
Outcry.
and they're like, we weren't informed. How did we know? Regardless of how many notices she puts in the newsletter, which,
Mhm.
it's that kind of, they're aware when they, we want to make sure. And so we even did a public outreach binder, and a lot of times those people that were so upset when they went through each, outreach article, newsletter, meeting. It was a little less, they were like, well, I still didn't know, kind of thing, but it wasn't for lack of trying to get the word out.
Well, I think human nature says that we don't, as a whole, we pay attention, but we probably don't pick out the minutia as I might call this, until I get the bill. Until my 10 properties I'm paying for until I got, oh God, I got to pay for on each of these 10. I'm not happy about that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and I think that's human nature. I don't think people are, trying to be nasty. They're just human nature. But the more information we can get out, the better off we'll be. But I mean, I really think we need to talk about
there'll
it
be
at
the
council level. And
conversations.
if it's all part of the 218 thing, I think we probably are going to have to support the process.
Yeah.
I don't know what you're thinking, Councilwoman.
After hearing all of this, Mr. McCoy, if the finance committee is going to make a recommendation to the city council, I'm going to go along with you and defer to the 12.8%.
Okay.
And then
Thank
that
you.
way it'll give the council a little bit of leeway.
Give a little bit of leeway, a little bit give.
Yeah.
I like that strategy.
I think she's got a great strategy.
Yeah.
That's a great way to think of it. So are we in agreement? That we're gonna bring this to the full council? And then, I mean, I'm asking the councilwoman, but I'm also then asking the finance team, because we're a member of the council, but we're all a member of the finance team, which makes a recommendation to the council, correct? If I'm correct, Councilwoman. Okay.
I'd like to hear from Paul. Is that going to work for you, Paul, to have two options like that?
Yeah, sure. We can do whatever your pleasure is.
So accommodating, Paul.
Thank you, Paul.
Hey, you guys are the boss. I do what you say.
So just for clarification, would you like to present both options or just,
Oh, I think we want to present all three on both options, and I think they want to start at the highest rate as the recommendation, giving the wiggle room to come down, but staying within the three options. Is that accurate?
What I'd prefer, and then I'd prefer to present it just like it was presented today.
okay,
And then what the councilwoman and I can say is that our recommendation is we go with not the higher, with the 12.8 and the 14.5. That way we know we've got the wiggle room. That's how I'd like to see it presented. What are you thinking?
I'm thinking I'd like to just present the two options,
Oh.
the middle of the round.
The middle and the high, take out the low.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's legal or not, but. I
No,
mean,
that's
what I'm-
totally fine.
That's what I'm thinking.
So take out the lowest option on both of them and just have two options for water and wastewater.
You know, it.
We're fine
if
with
it were
that.
the world according to Colleen Baker, that's what I would do.
I can agree. I can run with that.
Okay.
I can run with this, with Councilwoman Baker on that one.
Thank you. Thanks.
We have a recommendation. Fabulous.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
What a difference 10 years makes.
I
is all I can
I
say.
can tell by the look on Retta's face. She's just like staring at me. I'm all.
Oh, Retta. Come on,
look at
Retta.
her- Look at how happy she is.
Let's wait for the council meeting.
Yeah, let's wait and see what the other three members think. So can we go on to discussion item B, which is discussion of a full-time clerk position, which we've talked about in the past, haven't we?
Yeah,
I think we have.
I think John's gonna give a few words on that,
Come on, John.
and Emily both, yeah.
You only have an hour and 4 minutes because we're getting close to lunchtime. 1 minute.
So I got a couple things I'll pass around real quick. Sorry.
Oh, God.
Well, we've been working on
Thank you, sir.
city clerk job classification. I've also, what you'll see here too, is a little bit of data from about 10 other cities for the salary ranges for the city clerk. But my understanding is there's an absolute need for one. Considering the amount of time and hours and workload that's a part of it. I'm sure Retta knows that better than anyone. We've also looked at where this position would fall within our structure. And I think at this point, we're at where we believe it would fall within the management unit. So it would be a for-cause represented position. And if you see on the chart,
Say that again, I'm sorry.
it'd be a for-cause represented position, so it wouldn't be at will.
Thank you.
If you notice on the chart, the blue is the low end of the salary range and the orange is the high end. And City of Yreka is the third city in from the left. So we've looked at some salary ranges. I don't know if we're 100% stacked on what range that would be, but right now it's the 1668 range, which is right around, I believe, it's on, which is currently between 58,000 and 71. There would be 5 steps.
I'm sorry to cut you off, Mr. Elsnab. Are we good? Is Mr. Reuter okay to be off the call?
Yes.
Okay, Paul, yeah, thank you very much, Paul.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Go ahead.
So that's kind of where we're at with it. I don't have a whole lot of information on other than, we're looking at putting together not a assistant to the city manager, a actual city clerk that would eventually have to get their certified clerk. I'm going to butcher the terminology until I look at it.
Status.
Yeah, California Certified Municipal Clerk certification.
CMC.
Oh, well.
Does that
There
sound
you go.
consistent?
She would know.
Yeah, that's right, you would.
And yeah, historically, John, and you may have mentioned this, but the clerk position just goes back to the inception of the city where it was like a $25 or $35 a month salary, I believe.
That's correct in our muni code.
All right. And ultimately, what we have now is, I mean, there is an incredible staff at the city. So we have the assistant city manager acting in this role. And she's fabulous at it, but ultimately her tools are, she could be doing even more, even though she's doing an incredibly large amount of effort right now. But a lot of special projects are really the brainchild of Retta. This would free up more time for her, and without going too deeply into the future and the budget, but ultimately, are these the numbers that you balance the budget with, Emily? Because I believe that you have a balanced budget that you've worked on that ultimately includes a city clerk position. Okay.
The one thing I'll say on the compensation data is that strictly salary ranges. That does not include benefits, 457 plans, any other form of compensation. So it's not necessarily relative in a sense. But if you're just looking at salary ranges, what we proposed is probably on the lower end compared to some cities. If you're looking at the city of Reading, and all of them have different purposes and different classifications. Obviously, Susanville's different than Reading, just like we would be to Weed.
And there's you got your public records request, but at the moment, anytime we have a new ad hoc, or so we have the communications ad hoc, we have the fire ad hoc. Ultimately, this role would take care of agendizing and managing the meetings for each of them, including the planning commission meetings that, yeah, yep.
And historic commission, should that ever come about. Again,
Yeah, which I think, speaking to Juliana, there's talk about that possibility.
So the job classification is strictly draft. It has not been presented to the unions, which we would have to follow our employer resolution in order to create a new job classification. So there's still a little bit of the process left, or quite a bit left, but it can move relatively fast depending on council direction.
Emily. You can defer to whoever you want, but as far as money in the coffers, what are your thoughts? Good, bad, indifferent, positive? Does it affect us negatively? I'm only speaking cash flow. I'm not speaking in any other way. I know that it affects us positively to have somebody to do it, because it does take some things off of Retta's plate. And I know that Retta, I know that you're doing, when I come in, you're doing clerk stuff and that sort of thing, when you could be doing, $1 million, $1.5 million grants for city improvements. I understand that. So I'm just asking you from a fiscal standpoint, does it put us at any more risk than we're in now? What are your thoughts financially?
I don't need more risk. I think we're gonna have to make some decisions when our ARPA funding is no longer.
Okay.
That's, but I'm positively optimistic as, revenue trends are upscaling. Those all look positive. But definitely a position that I feel is needed as Retta, as we've mentioned, Retta's abilities to find and research and go after monies to benefit the city as a whole is where we want her time and talent to be spent.
Thoughts?
Yes, all of the above.
All of that. You just got to come up with it right now.
I mean, the clerk does do a lot of things and it is time consuming. And it's the permanent record of the city. It is the.
There's a
thing
lot of
everybody
things
goes
on
back
hold.
to, and it's like, well, it's written here, it's written here. So I mean, it is a very important position that I think historically we have kind of slumped off as, oh, it's like, just somebody do that. And we just kind of throw it from person to person. But having somebody dedicated to making sure that that's done appropriately and correctly will help keep us out of hot water as well.
I'm not going to disagree that the council in my 5 years has at times said, well, we'll get to it. We'll get to it. We'll get to it. While at the same time, for the whole 4 years, for the whole time I was here with Steve Baker, God bless him, we'd said, Steve, hire an assistant city manager. Steve, hire, no, hire. And it was going on before I got on. It was going on for 2 years, I think, Retta, before I got on, or 3 years, that the old council was saying, hire an assistant city manager. I mean, it was, it was in all all kinds of stuff we wrote. So I mean, I know that the assistant city manager, and then we talked briefly, not near as much, but about a city clerk. So, and I will say, I can't speak for like Councilwoman Baker's old position or some of the positions like Wayne Hammer or Mike Mallory, but I know with my wife, with her position at the county office, out of 65 SELPA directors and directors of special ed, she was the lowest paid in the state of California. So when her position, when she retired and her position came up, and I've told the story before, people laughed at her. When she went down to Sacramento, Los Angeles recruiting, they literally laughed at her. Why would we take a 20 or 30 or $40,000 pay cut? Now, why do I say that? Because again, when I moved up here in '86, I took a $7,000 pay cut to enter at the same level as a teacher. And my wife took we took almost 15,000 altogether. And as I look at, without going into great detail, at CEOs in 2 or 3 different areas up here that are non-governmental, I see that we're paying anywhere from $50,000 to $90,000 a year less or 50 to 80,000. I'll be kind to CEOs in some of the larger companies up here than would be being paid in Reading or farther south. So as you start to look at, from an HR standpoint, as we start to look at that. So yes, is this probably low comparatively to the state? It probably is, but I think for us, it's a good starting point if in fact we decide to do it. I think you've done your homework, and I mean, people, I know it's sad, but when I interviewed up here, when Connie interviewed up here, superintendents who all of them, you guys know all of them because you're all local, said, oh, no, you pay to live up here. You pay to live up here. Well, we did. Now, granted, we love it. And that's why we stayed, because we love the area. But you do pay, in a sense, to live in Siskiyou County. But I think we do need, I think we need a city clerk. I think as long as we have Retta here as an assistant city manager. And Retta, I'm sorry I put a dollar value on you, but I know I do because I've talked, but I mean, she's bringing in money from grants and things like that, and seeing things that maybe other people in the office don't see because she's freed up to do that. And that's why I'd like to see her more freed up to do that. I mean, as long as we can, do it with ARPA monies. I do know that ARPA monies will run out probably within the next 18 months to 3 years, depending on where you are. So depending on what state you're in and all kinds of stuff.
So I think this position can only enhance the city's professionalism. I think people don't have an understanding of what the clerk does, but that position is what keeps an organization, an entity, a jurisdiction legal. And there is a lot to the position. It's not something that you can just put anybody into and say, hey, do this. I mean, you could, but from my experience, you need people that are willing to be educated. And I think that obtaining the certified municipal clerks certification is absolutely critical. I think that's an excellent background, and as well as developing peers from throughout the state. So you can just reach out and go, hey, how do you handle this? What do you do? And I'm amazed at what Retta does, because I've been the clerk. That's more than a full-time job in itself. I think that the salary is reasonable. And I just can't speak enough to it. I'm all in favor of this. I think it's just going to enhance the city's professionalism.
We agree with you and we appreciate that feedback. And ultimately, as I started the conversation as well, we have a balanced budget with this position already, included. And so it's a huge need going forward for the city. Absolutely. Let's just imagine, that Reddit, in 5 years decided not to be here anymore and
Or
retired.
7 to 10.
7 to 10 years from now, when Reddit calls it quits. Really, when we go out and seek somebody else in that role, they're going to be so far behind what we're getting out of the work product from this person, because they've been here for so long, and they're just at a level that it would be inappropriate to assume that another person would come in as the assistant city manager and they would essentially just be the clerk is what they would be doing. And it's not an appropriate use of the position. So.
Well, and I would like to thank Councilwoman Baker, because she's the one that has the most experience with this of any of us on the committee, or any of the 5 of us as council members. And I would like to thank her for her insight as the former county clerk. And I think her recommendation, I would completely concur with it, and hope that we could bring this. I don't know what you need, whether it has to come to the council. Well, I think at some point it has to, but I would like to, I would like to see it move forward. I think as Councilwoman Baker was, and again, if we listen to her, she has the experience.
Yeah, and you raise a good point. So just real briefly, ultimately, the city council gets to determine how many positions exist within the city structure. And, when we're at the county, or usually their position control, right? That's your guys' oversight. So let's just say a position gets created, it's budgeted for, you guys vote on that and you approve it, then inevitably we continue to staff that position. So ultimately, this position does not exist. Therefore, it definitely is under the guidance of the city council, has to make that determination.
Councilwoman Baker, are you comfortable with that? Affirmative or negatively, or?
Oh, I definitely think that you should move forward. And is it going to be part of the budget process
It is.
this year?
Yeah, that's our intention, is to have it as part of the budget process. So it would be part of that entire package of approval.
Sweet.
Can we concur as a committee that we're a go on this?
Did you want to do a advance hire to post it prior to the budget or not?
A what?
Were you seeking that?
We have the ability to do advanced hire. So knowing with confidence that the budget's going to be passed in full, we can start recruiting for that position now, so that when the budget is passed, we can go ahead and that person's already been interviewed and the ball's already rolling, so we can get that position filled as quickly as possible.
Well, it is important to note, because Councilwoman Baker asked how this is going to affect the budget. I did. You said that we already have it built in to a balanced budget.
An unapproved balanced budget. So,
Unapproved balanced budget. I would be in favor of an advanced hire, but I don't know where Councilwoman Baker is.
And I think what we're talking about is ultimately there would be no hire. It would be essentially the authority to go out, post the position.
Interview.
And through that process, we're also coinciding with hypothetically bringing that to city council. And if city council for some reason wanted to make cuts and then cut that position out, then we wouldn't extend the actual offer. But if it went as we assume it would go, then an approved budget, and then we're somewhere in the process of being much quicker at being able to make an offer because we've already posted. And generally, we want positions like this to be posted for a longer period of time. We're not trying to post something for a week and then make a decision. This
That's
would
going to be
be
a more intricate piece of our puzzle.
Yeah, this is posted for a month at bare minimum, and possibly even longer if we're just not getting the response we want.
So this is just a question, just because I'm curious. Does the city do like internal only recruitments versus external, or is everything external?
This will be external, but we can do internal only
okay.
ultimately. Yeah, and I think we've utilized that. And I can't recall, Mr. Bray can answer this question, but we have positions that are really growth positions, and water and wastewater are 2 of those positions. And ultimately, there's just there's a funnel where you come in as a maintenance worker, and inevitably you spend your time doing that. You learn, and if you want to continue to move forward or progress up the ladder, you can. And we like to hold those positions for internal growth, because I think that does a lot for employee morale, that people have a step to continue to grow. But a position like this would be open to, we would open it up to everybody.
Well, I personally am very excited about this opportunity.
Go for it.
No, I'm weighing the advance, what did you call it, Emily?
Advance hire.
Advance hire, only because how can I put this delicately?
It's presumptive, and there's
Yeah.
it kind of, I think sometimes it shows, oh, well, we're just gonna get a yes vote on this or something, and
Yeah.
we're not going through the process. So it's not the end of the world. We can certainly wait. I mean, what is your anticipated kind of time frame for probably budget? August?
First part of August.
Yeah, I think I'd like to hold off on that, just again, because we don't want to just presume that the council is, how the council will perceive the advance hire.
Yeah,
In the meantime, we can get the job description approved through the union and things like that, if that sounds appropriate, to where that's not holding us back.
I can support Councilwoman Baker on that point.
okay.
Thank you, Councilwoman Baker.
You're welcome.
Excellent. What's next on the docket here?
Oh, so the recommendation to council, correct me if I'm wrong, one of you other finance committee members, the recommendation will be to go ahead and build in for the 2000 for the next year budget, annual budget, and city, hang on, let me make sure I got this right. To build in a full-time city clerk position, anticipating a vote from the council as to whether they would support it or not support it, but we need to build it in to the budget so that we make sure we have a balanced budget. And then bring it to, I guess, in an August meeting, when you bring the budget, yeah, we'll bring it, yeah. Does that sound acceptable to the councilwoman and to the committee?
Yes.
Yes.
So we're there. So now, thank you, John, you're gone on already. Item C, recommendation of consultant on the safety initiative request for proposal, or RFP. Is that you, Jerry? No?
Jerry's here because he's a part of, obviously, this is a huge part of the overall long-term plan, and we just want also to reiterate what that plan is ultimately, and where we're at in that plan and how everything is tied together. So we had, and I'm not sure who's speaking to this, but I'll just lead it off. So you guys approved the ability to do a ballot initiative request for proposal. We had 2 bids come back. One company has been essentially selected that we like. It is less than the $80,000, which was approved when you guys did approve this at City Council. And this is essentially really the backbone, in my opinion, to not only the fire hall, but also to paid fire staff. And this ballot initiative will be extremely important in dictating what our fire department looks like in about 10 years, in my opinion. Technically, it's open to a multitude of different options. More than likely, I just kind of will speculate. My assumption is it's probably going to be a 0.5% sales tax was where we're going to land, which makes the most sense, but that's still to be determined. We know that's roughly in the $1 million range. We know that we've got a design, we've got kind of a cost for engineer and design that we'll discuss at some point. That's roughly $1 million, a little over $1 million to get for this fire hall. And so I think when we talked about the last visioning workshop, I think I brought up there's 2 items within what I would call the general fund that are extremely important to the staff and I believe to the community. And they are a fire hall, which includes some level of paid staff to mitigate the medical call situation and the issue with volunteerism that overall the United States is seeing. And then the Ringy RFP will be hitting the street later this week. And we anticipate that, we would love to fund both of those projects over the next decade. And it's going to take tenacity and focus from the city council to remain strong, to make sure that we continue to budget and focus things in that direction. And ultimately, when it comes to the fire hall and paid fire staff, I don't think there's a more important issue in the city of Yreka. And there's no easy fix. We're going to have to go out to the public with the ballot initiative. That's the step that we're currently on. And it is highly, highly tied to not only a long-term fire hall, but rectifying paid fire staff, which we're in dire need for. Ultimately, it's just unfair to think that somebody at 4 a.m. can get a text message to show up and give a Narcan shot to someone ODing at the truck stop, which is something I got to see firsthand during the McKinney fire with Chief Gilman. And it was myself, Chief Gilman, and I would say, since we had law enforcement from so many other jurisdictions, there's probably 8 law enforcement officers there. And lo and behold, one volunteer Yreka Fire Department person doing all the work that was getting paid $0. And it's just not feasible to think that that'll continue. So I took us on a tangent there on this conversation, but this is the RFP for the ballot initiative. But it is all tied
Call it a
to
bird walk, okay?
the
It's a bird
great-
walk.
yeah.
Now bring us back. That's
the
good.
greater good,
You know what, though? I think that is an excellent example to use when we are selling basically this sales tax increase, because you're absolutely right. You have all these professionals that are being paid, and you have the volunteer fireman who's there, who's doing all the work, accepting I'm assuming that there's some liability that's involved with that I'm sure they're covered. But I mean, yeah, I think that is a very powerful story to tell.
Yeah, and that person had to wake up the next morning and go do their regular job. And this is just one of the most crucial steps in this process, because the city has done a pretty remarkable job. And Jerry and Matt were both involved in 2 different measures, differently. Measure H, which we're going to have to educate the public on how much money that actually brings in for the Yreka Fire Department. And right now that is primarily used so that we have really nice equipment. And then Measure C, Matt worked on Measure C, which was some level of safety and primarily roads with how we chip seal. And they did a fabulous job. Measure H was property tax. So that took a couple times. Measure C, I believe, passed on the first round, but ultimately both of those things were done in-house. And this is the major change, is that we're seeking a company to come in, go out and pull pull what the public is thinking, what their appetite is, and then work with us on an education campaign where we flood the market with, this is what you get if you were to support this. This is what's in jeopardy if you don't support this. And I just truly believe, if this is tied to the fire department, I believe that this will pass and that we will get the funding. So, but I will let Retta and Emily maybe chime in with more details on this actual item.
Yeah, this, we'll just be bringing it to the council as an information item, as we adopted a resolution authorizing the city manager to engage a firm. So we'll just kind of bring back the proposal, so you kind of get familiar with the proposal and the timeline, and could comment at that point. So that'll be on the agenda for the 20th. That's all.
Yeah, and we're looking, it's another opportunity to continue to educate people on where we're headed. And that's why Mr. Lemos is here too. If you have anything else you kind of want to add or talk about, I know that Jerry's involved not only on this selection, but also right now on the selection of the engineering firm for for the proposed fire hall. And so I don't know if you have anything that you want to talk about. I know that we're all very concerned about making this successful. There's already so much effort that's been put in place, and we want to continue to drive forward with everybody on the same page that the fire hall and paid fire staff are two of the highest priorities in the city. But
Thank you for those, for those words. Very, very eloquent, and I couldn't have said it better myself, so I won't repeat any of that other than to say that situation that you referred to, that one that you witnessed, is repeated, as you would say, as you probably know, can guess, many, many times every month and then some. So to have that kind of vision, and if you educate the public to those things, as Council Member Baker pointed out, that I think as an example, that I don't see how you could go wrong in portraying it, where that eventually comes out at the end of the election. We hope it's in our favor, because it is needed. I've seen our membership go from 45 members in 1994 to, about 18 now. And out of those 18, you have half of those that are probably able to or willing to dedicate, a lot of time. And out of those 9 or whatever that number would, truly is, I mean, it changes with family obligations and, those types of things. But having said that, it's, usually medicals are not something everybody likes to go on, because it is have to go up and get up and go to work the next day. So I've scaled back on mine because, it has impacts to your health if you don't get sleep, so it can definitely be one of those things that is a reason for people to leave and not come back. So having said that as well, paid staff is an option. I think we're on the right track. We have a lot of things in place. And so I'm optimistic that we are doing the right things. And, once we educate the public, having this consultant, if you will, guide us through it. If we'd had it for Measure H, it might have been a different, we might have got it past the first go round. So there is a tremendous amount of knowledge, anecdotal type things that when the public hears those things, it has a different impact than if, you might hear it in, I don't know, in another venue, but you hear it from the people that are there, you witnessed it. Those types of things I think are invaluable. So I appreciate that, those words. Fire department, as far as we are concerned now, we get the job done, but we have to be forward thinking and not look back or and not be proactive in our approach to, how are we going to maintain a force, for years to come. So, someone who can be there all the time as paid staff would be. Other things can occur during the day as far as maintenance. There's a lot of other jobs they could be doing as well as when you're building a department. It doesn't have to be, we could start small with what we can afford and build on that. So that's what I have in my little pea brain right now. But I think I'm definitely for this sales tax initiative personally, because that's, the people that are going to be utilizing it are the citizens that are either here or are traveling through our community. And so, that's what we have to use to get the money, then, so be it. But it's an opportunity for us to move forward and to progress and not stay as a department that's always strained for personnel. So, yeah. Thank you. If you guys have any questions, I'd be glad.
So we need a recommendation on the consultant. I mean, I think we probably all see the need for the new fire hall and for, at some point, a paid fire department. My recommendation would be that we go to the councils, that we need to go to council and recommend that we continue to move forward on this. What is your recommendation, Councilwoman?
Well, in the secret world of the elections clerk, Measure H was help. And Measure C was chip sealing. And I just can't tell you, during election time, I spent so much time just educating people about the different issues that were on their local ballot, because there was no information out there available or very limited, and it was in legalese that people couldn't understand. So I'm really excited. I think that this is a really proactive approach, and I'm assuming that this would go on the ballot in November of 24.
Actually, were we was it November or was there a March date for
They're-
some reason?
They'll assess which one, but I could be wrong. I'm gonna say probably November 24.
Okay.
They're gonna help us assess that, whether March or November. I think it's Retta's gut feeling, and I think it's most of ours, that it's gonna be November of when that goes.
Mhm.
Because you'll have more voters. at the-
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm ready to go forward.
Great.
Okay, is the committee as a whole, like the two council members here are ready to go forward? Is the committee as a whole ready to go forward and make a recommendation to the council?
Yes,
Okay, when would that, what's the earliest that would be, at the next meeting, or
that'll be at the 20th. Yeah, I believe Retta alluded to it before. Yep.
Councilwoman, does that sound, the timeline sound doable to you?
It does, yes.
Okay, then we're going to move forward with that. And on both of our behalf, I want to thank you for putting in the work. And it's a great, it's a fair tax as far as the public goes. It's because we're not all paying it. I think we're only paying about a third of it. The rest of it's being paid from people out of town. I mean, based on what our studies have shown us here in Yreka. But the other thing is that it's for a fabulous cause.
And
It's-
I'd like to make a really stupid statement, if you don't mind, Mr. McCoy.
Yes,
and
sir.
That is, even if it fails, I think it will be a very wise decision, because I just think that there are too many people in our community that don't know that the fire department that shows up is unpaid.
It's educational. Yeah, either way.
So I think through the process, we are going to flood the market with education and information about not only our proposed fire hall, but about the unpaid staff. And we will essentially leave it up to the voters. It is their decision on what they want to do, but they should leave November 2024 knowing exactly what the landscape of the fire department looks like for the city of Yreka.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Councilwoman. We're going to move on to Emily, probably for a brief update of the budget process.
And I think we've kind of touched on it intermittently through today's conversation in total. Our budget is looking balanced. We are refining some details on it before we have it ready for your draft review. We're looking at having it to council beginning of August. We do have a resolution going in this next meeting that will give us that opportunity to extend past June 30th. Just gives me that a little extra time. As you can tell, between the rate study and the budget, it's kind of a balancing act to make sure that I'm budgeting appropriately in our enterprise funds, knowing, having an idea of what our next half of 23-24 will look like, and 24-25, because we are doing a 2-year budget cycle. We did include the clerk position. We've made some movement of some people or positions, sorry, that we have some planning support that I think you saw in your rate study that is going to be used to help support water and sewer and their projects. So we can do some of that in-house to help Juliana not carry as much of the burden, or us having to go out and pay for that outside service.
Well, and you're also, I think, responding to the fact that I think part of what I'm hearing, when you make the adjustment, you're talking about, like, we now have a Greenhorn reservoir, not a Greenhorn lake, where it is now considered again a reservoir. So we're able to take care of some of the things around the reservoir with water money as opposed to general public works money. That's part of what you're doing.
Nail
You're-
on the
you're-
head,
You're
yeah.
you're looking at things fiscally from that standpoint.
Correct.
And it is important that we maintain that as a reservoir, because 20 years from now, we may have to have that. When we're gone, we're all retired, we're long gone. We're not looking at us now, we're looking at down the line. So I think was a smart move on Mr. Bray's part and Retta's part to thank you, Retta and Mr. Bray, for working on, or Matt and Ms. Hogan for working on that. I do really appreciate it. So was there any more? Okay, did you have any questions in regards to budget at this time, Councilwoman Baker, or any other thoughts or that you wanted to share? I didn't mean to cut you
No.
off.
You know, this is my first city budget process, so.
Ditto.
Don't say that.
I, you know, I'm just looking forward to seeing how it unfolds, and I have such tremendous respect for city staff. I just am so excited that you guys are just like so proactive. And that makes all the difference in the world. I mean, because when you think about it, Mr. McCoy, you're absolutely right. We are sowing into the future of Yreka. And that's kind of exciting to be a part of that process. And I just want to thank you guys all. I just am so impressed with your forward thinking, your professionalism, and your ability to explain things to me. So I appreciate you guys. And I'm just waiting to see kind of how it unfolds and to see if you have gray hair by the end of the process. That will tell me a lot.
I'm working on it.
They get you some, not greasy corner, that's romantic. Something.
Just gonna let it flow. I'll earn it. It's fine.
I'm sure your husband's gonna be.
He'll be fine. He's fine.
So thank you very much for those kind comments. Is there any more for the good of the order at this time? Yes, go ahead, Ms. Hogan.
I want to give a shout out to Juliana for drafting the RFP for the public safety initiative because she made it happen really. So she's like drafted and said, here you go. And I did the edited and issued and off we
Yeah,
went. So
that was awesome.
just
Please
wanna
let
make sure she
Juliana
gets
know that on
recognition.
behalf of the Finance Committee that we're very thankful for what she did. So Finance Director Dan,
Dancer.
Gosh.
We went way back.
whoa. Finance Director Emily, do you have anything else you wanted to add? Sorry.
No, I don't think so. I think we're good.
City Manager Ledbetter?
No, but I thank you for the compliments from Miss Baker to the staff. We certainly do appreciate that. So thank you.
Assistant City Manager Hogan, and we got Public Works Director Bray. Anything there? Yeah. Any final comments, Councilwoman? Then we stand adjourned at 11:36.
I looked at you just a minute ago and I had a flashback to
Appreciate that.
2010.